Hello and welcome to our live and interactive broadcast all about the fossil fuel lobby, which we're all so afraid of, but afraid no longer. I'm joined here, as you can tell, by Jesse Bragg, who I'm going to tell you a little bit about a bit later on, but he's here representing Corporate Accountability International, who are one of the kind of the biggest drivers of the move to kick big polluters out of COP21. And as you can imagine, there's very few people who feel that big polluters have a respectable place in some of these big climate negotiations.
The
And
fossil fuel lobby, which we're all
we
so
have
afraid
some
of, but
fun
afraid
feedback
no
going on
longer.
here. And great, so no worries there. Just a nice little bit of feedback for you, so you can tell the sound system's all working. But we are kind of going to dive in to everything that Jesse and Corporate Accountability International has been doing throughout the year, working to try and put more pressure and I guess raise the transparency bar on some of these big corporate lobby groups who are, as you can imagine, have a bit of an interest in slowing down some of the climate negotiations and have done so pretty successfully throughout the last 20 to 30 years. You might have seen some news about ExxonMobil recently, which I'm sure Jesse will dive into, but I can tell you that it's not just them, and I can tell you that there are some closer to home companies, if you like, if you're watching from France, that might actually be named and shamed a little bit later on. But basically, join us for the next 40 minutes. We're going to dive into this issue, and we're going to really focus on how you can actually get involved in this. This is an issue that some people really feel is too big and too, I guess, well-funded to really do anything about. But it's actually an issue that we're going to be doing things about directly from now until the first couple of weeks of the COP, and it's an issue that's really, really close to my heart, and it's an issue that I really think that if we're strategic about it and if we're clever about it, we can really make some key influence in this COP, and I guess bring home to audiences around the world the importance that their country needs to stand up in the face of these corporate lobbyists. But we'll get to that very shortly. As you can tell, my name's Chris Wright. I manage the Adopt a Negotiator Climate Tracker project, and we're here for a webinar with the Corporate Accountability International Group represented by Jesse Bragg. If you want to get involved, you can use the hashtag #CallForClimate or the hashtag Climate Tracker. You can also post your ideas, your questions, your links on the Facebook pages Kick the Fossil Fuel Industry Out of COP21. Version 2 is the public site. Or you can engage on this Google Hangout page. We're going to be checking all of those sites, the Twitter feed, the Facebook, and the Google Hangout for your questions. And we have a packed schedule, but we'll definitely make some time for all of you and your questions on board. So, without any further ado, the lovely man who I have on the small screen next to me is Jesse Bragg. And Jesse, why don't you say hello to the audience and give us a little bit of an idea of who are you and what do you care about?
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Who am I? And hello to everybody else around the world. I do media work for Corporate Accountability International, but that's just sort of what I do during the day. I used to work on political campaigns here in the U.S. For Democrats almost exclusively. There are a couple slip-ups here and there, but I decided to get out of that work because, as you probably all know, our political system is pretty messed up here in the U.S., not unlike some other parts of the world. But the problem with it here in the U.S. is it has such a huge impact on everybody else. So just before I continue on myself, like, we're talking about maybe this agreement not being binding because of Congress here in the U.S. So I got out of that work because I knew I wasn't really making the difference that I thought I was. So I live here in Boston, and for once the sun is out, and we work on a whole bunch of different issues, including food and food marketing, tobacco control, and water privatization, and now climate. So we have kind of a broad scope of issues that we work on, but we often talk about how we're an organization of just 50 people, and every single one of us sees ourselves as environmentalists, that are sort of working on campaigns that weren't directly related to the environment for some time. And about a year ago, we launched this climate campaign, and now we're all fighting to be part of the climate work, supporting the work in Paris, and so it's a very exciting time for us. When I'm not on webinars or talking to the media, I spend a lot of time on my bike, fighting relatively dangerous traffic here in Boston, or when I need to get away from all of the madness, I spend a lot of time in the woods, hiking, cycling, etc. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, that's great, and it's interesting you say a few of those slip-ups. I won't get you to name any of those slip-ups for sure, but I definitely kind of would be interested in your perspective as someone who's worked at the top level of these I guess political campaigns and working with big political leaders. Could you see it even then, the influence of some of these big corporations on some of their decision making?
Absolutely. I think there are some of the folks that I work for, some of the elected officials that I work for, have taken on issues that just don't seem relevant to their constituents. For example, there's one that does a lot of work for Hollywood, for the movie making industry, but he's based in New England, very far away, thousands of miles away from Hollywood. And so the question is, what's going on there? The reality is that there's a lot of money funding his interest, and that concept is applied across the board, and I think for our purposes, it's no secret that the fossil fuel industry, the coal industry in the U.S. has done irreparable damage, I think, to the policymaking process around the world, and especially in the U.S. The idea that we still have elected officials in our legislature saying that, well, it snowed out today, so that climate change can't possibly be real, is just one small indication of how crazy these people are, and how damaging their work is on our work as environmentalists.
Definitely, and I hope one of those slip-ups wasn't that individual who did bring the snowball into Congress. If it was, I don't count it as a slip-up. I think that's a terminal mistake. But
no way.
But anyway, let's dive into some of the kind of, you said it was a bit of an inspiration of yourself and some of the other colleagues to dive into climate change. Was that kind of a decision that was made alongside some of the other work that you do? Did the group come together and think, look, this is as big an important issue in terms of the negative lobbying that's going on as everything else we work with, or was it a tough decision to make?
It's a great question. We've been working with some groups that are probably familiar to some people on this webinar, in particular Corporate Europe Observatory. They're based in Brussels, and we'd worked with them on a lot of corporate accountability issues more broadly. And in 2013, before COP19 in Warsaw, they got in touch with us because they had been observing the development of COP19, the Polish government looking for funding for COP19 and getting that funding from the coal mining industry and the World Coal Association and all of these terrible actors in climate policy. And they knew our history on tobacco control and asked us for our expertise about firewalling the industry in question, and this time fossil fuel industry, from the policymaking process, because we had been successful in doing that in a similar body at the World Health Organization on a tobacco control treaty. So we gave them research and helped develop a report that they put out in 2013, and thought, you know what, we'll just help advise them and work with them on this. But then it became clear after Lima that things were only going to get worse. And we saw when the French Congress denied a certain amount of funding for COP21 and the announcement that they were going to be looking for up to 20% of their funding from private corporations. And we knew it was just going to get worse than it was in Warsaw. So considering the difference between tobacco work and climate work is, yes, people die every day from tobacco-related illness, but it's reversible. At some point, the climate crisis isn't reversible, and that's why we knew we had to get involved, because there was no more time to waste, and we needed to do everything we possibly could now in order to stop the worst effects of climate change.
Definitely, and it sounds like a really kind of great rationale, a really kind of tough decision that you guys made, but a really kind of a logical one, and one that I guess a lot of people are really happy for now. But just before we dive into some more of that kind of amazing work that you're doing, let's just throw it out there. What is the worst example you have right now of a fossil fuel company kind of trying to take these negotiations?
I think the worst example is really present on a lot of our minds right now, which is what ExxonMobil has just been found to have done. And the reason it affects, before I get into the details on that, the reason this US-based corporation affects the climate negotiations is because they affect the US policy positions and what they take to the treaty negotiations. And as you know, I don't know if folks saw that when U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said this treaty is not going to be binding, he's reflecting the position of the U.S. And unfortunately, that means to a lot of countries that this treaty is not going to be binding. They're just one party, but they carry the weight of far more. And so when you have a corporation like ExxonMobil is found to have known about climate change since the late 70s and then buried the truth. They knew what the problem was. They knew they were contributing to it, and instead of trying to figure out how to lessen the effects that they were driving, they decided, you know what? I like money way too much to worry about what this is doing to the environment, and decided to bury the truth and help fund campaigns, for example, of folks like Senator James Inhofe, who carries a snowball into the Senate and says, look, it snowed outside, climate change is a hoax. And they've perpetuated this narrative that there is doubt behind the science of climate change. And that has completely eviscerated the environmental policy development in the US and therefore really hindered the negotiations at the UNFCCC. So I really, I think the Exxon files or investigations, they revealed a lot of terrible things that that Exxon, and I'm sure we'll find out, many other fossil fuel corporations engaged in order to maintain their business at the cost of the environment and potentially millions of lives.
Do you mean that? Do you mean millions of lives?
What's that?
Do you mean millions of lives?
I do. There are various studies out that show. I mean, whether it's pollution or the more aggressive and destructive and deadly weather events that we're having around the world, lives are being lost as a direct result of climate change. And when you look at the industries that are driving climate change, it's a very easy connection between the fossil fuel industry or the transportation industry and climate change. So, while we can't say that ExxonMobil is going to places in the South Pacific and taking lives, the results of their business are, and we absolutely need to slow this down, because it's not just about rising sea levels, it's about the lives and the livelihoods the sea levels displace, for example.
Yeah, I definitely hear that, and it's a critical issue, and you'll see that some of the studies that we've kind of highlighted earlier in the year on climate change and health, when it regards to kind of not only the long-term effects, but the short-term effects and some of the pollutants that get exposed by some of these really large industries that unfortunately don't exist in their own bubble, and unfortunately exist very close to very large populations in a lot of countries around the world. It's only now that we're finding out that these industries are directly contributing to, a number, like thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths every year,
Right.
especially in countries like India and China. And actually, we've got Andreas Sieber on the call as well, who I haven't introduced yet, but he's one of our climate trackers who's heading to Paris very shortly. He's actually going to be hitchhiking to Paris. He's in Germany right now. And Andreas, you have quite a big fossil fuel industry in Germany as well that has quite a big of an influence on a lot of things in your country when it comes to politics, which is something that a lot of people don't really reflect upon too often, because we often think that Germany is, I guess, one of the saints of the European charge to kind of push for renewables. What's your ideas on this kind of role of the big fossil fuel companies in Germany? And do any of these things that Jesse's saying about fossil fuels in the US ring home to you in Germany?
Well, just like you said, you might think of Germany as one of the green countries, as one of the countries which is the homeland to the Energiewende, of the transformation of the energy system towards renewables. But we also do have a lot of sad stories, actually, regarding influence from not necessarily so much fossil fuel lobby, but coal lobby and the car lobby. And let me just tell you three very short stories about that, how really these lobbies make a huge impact, unfortunately, on our policy. So, for example, the last big decision on energy policy in Germany in 2010 was made by Angela Merkel inviting the heads of the big coal companies of Germany to the chancellery, and then basically just deciding in harmony what those guys wanted. Fortunately, we had a lot of demonstrations and a lot of protests the year afterwards to make this decision happen. But this was a huge problem at this moment. Really, the big energy companies, the big coal companies basically dictated what was the decision of the German government at that moment. Or every 5 years in the European Union, we have decisions on on limits of emissions of cars. And what you have, like, really every time, so it really goes every time like this, says you actually have kind of good and ambitious decisions or proposals by the European Union, but then you can wait for 1 week or something or two, and then you can be sure that the German government comes in and says, like, no, we have such a big and nice country, we don't want to really have this limits for car emissions, that ambition that it actually would protect the climate. Because all the big car companies, not only VW, but also Mercedes, BMW, and all these German companies called Angela Merkel or whoever in the government and really just demanded that we must not have these limits. And this is a big problem, I think. Or just right now, this year, we had last week a report that Germany will probably miss its climate protection for 2020. And the reason for that is that this year we actually had a proposal for shutting down a lot of coal plants in Germany. And what then happened is that all the big energy companies came out, went to Vice Minister Gabriel, who is also the minister in charge of or responsible for all the power plants and energy supply, and told this guy, well, we don't want this to happen, and he really kind of just, well, really went down, and basically what now happens is that the coal industries paid for phasing out just very few of their coal power plants, and that Germany right now will set climate targets to these lobbyists. I think that's a problem, that's something we definitely have to stop in Paris.
Absolutely. So Jesse, is that news to you, or have you also been monitoring the situation in Germany and I guess across Europe? Is it the same sort of music being played in Europe, or is it a different style?
Yeah, I mean, Andreas has more probably a little bit see more recent examples, but the same thing is happening in Europe. You see a lot. I think the difference in Europe is you have a public climate that doesn't allow the fossil fuel corporations to be as blatantly against environmental policy as they are in the US. So in Europe, they use groups like Business Europe to do their dirty work. while Total can say, no, we want to be a constructive part of the solution publicly, behind closed doors, they're using their lobby group, Business Europe, to completely eviscerate different climate policy, whether it's the renewable targets for the EU or transportation emissions regulations. Across the board, European fossil fuel corporations are presenting two images. One is the sort of fantasy land that they can both be environmental citizens and fossil fuel corporations. And two is the reality, through their trade groups and direct lobbying behind closed doors. They're destroying environmental policy both at the individual country level and at the regional level in the EU. So it's absolutely the same case, and I don't ever mean to overstate the US's unfortunate power in these negotiations, because the EU is right there next to them sometimes, especially with partner countries like Germany, who can be big obstacles because they have such a large and powerful coal and automotive industry.
Yeah, it's sad to hear things like this when you have one image about kind of how great or positive a country is, and then suddenly you dive in a little bit deeper and maybe behind a few of those closed doors, and you get a slightly different image. But let's you did mention kind of some of the negotiations coming up. Let's dive back into COP21. So as everyone knows, we are here in Paris. I'm here in Paris. And we are preparing for COP21, which is going to be the most highly anticipated climate change negotiation probably that's ever been. It'd be competing with Copenhagen right now, and I guess we'll see how things turn out over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But Jesse, COP21 has been a key focus for Corporate Accountability International. Why has it been a key focus, and have you been doing anything about it?
I think it's been a key focus for us because it's such an important moment in the environmental movement. I think we're running out of runway, if you will. We need to come to a solution that adequately addresses the needs of those most impacted by climate change and prescribes limits on emissions. And the reason that COP21 is that moment is because we've had 21 years. I mean, how many more years do we need in order to arrive at this agreement? We've had 21 years to meaningfully address climate change and its effects. And whether it's talking with parties who are becoming more and more sort of disenchanted with the process, or looking at the effects of climate change today, this is the moment because we can't wait for another one. And so that's why we got involved. And that combined with the fact that the French government said, okay, about 1/5 of this we will look for corporate sponsors for, made it the perfect moment to introduce this conversation. And just one more thing before I sort of end my response. I think what is key at this point in these negotiations is a paradigm shift amongst all people involved. We need to stop looking at these negotiations in these bins of adaptation and mitigation, loss and damage, and start looking at the process overall. What are we trying to accomplish, and how are we trying to accomplish it? We can't do that with Shell calling the shots behind closed doors. We need people making decisions for people, and I think we've moved really far away from that.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of people focus is definitely one of the key aspects of what a lot of civil society organizations are calling for here in COP21. And actually, you were a big part of one of these civil society pushes this year. Corporate Accountability International launched a big petition which got a few signatures. I mean, I asked a few family members to sign, but it looked like you got a few other families to join on. How many people have signed it so far, and how is it going?
There's somewhere between 3 and probably 250,000 families signed on. We have about 500,000 or 500,000 people signed on to this call today. and it's growing every day. We've been blown away by how far-reaching the support has been for this, and I think it's because it's one of those things that all of a sudden dawns on people, like, oh my, I cannot believe that we've let it go this far. And so people are very excited to get involved, and stop this before it's too late.
Absolutely, and we actually have another kind of caller on the line here. We have Pavlos Georgidis from Greece, who knows quite a bit about the role of, I guess, corporate lobby groups in shaping national policy, and actually kind of has some personal concerns he wants to share about the role of Greece and some of its development plans. So, Pavlos, Greece is not in the best economic position right now. And I understand that it might be through, I guess, fossil fuel development that Greece is trying to find one of its ways out of it. Is that correct? And what do you have to share from us from Greece?
Yes, Greece is one of the countries that has a huge solar potential and is actually basing a big part of its economy on the sun for the tourism industry. Nevertheless, we have the solar potential and the wind energy potential of the country, like the renewable energy potential of the country, is not used at all. On the contrary, we have the public electricity company, which is one of the largest emitters in the country. They are emitting about 38% of fossil fuel, of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. Despite we here having a relatively new government, which is supposed to be progressive and environment pro, nevertheless, we have seen in the last 10 months a huge investment in coal. Greece is building 2 new coal plants invested by a German energy giant. So in terms of the whole debate on fossil fuel lobbies and with views to COP21, what I would like to bring in the discussion is that we have, from one side, Germany, which is a huge supporter and champion of decarbonization, and then on the other side, we see German companies investing in coal and dirty energy in Greece and other countries. Now, this is basically something that citizens in Greece are totally kept out of the discussion. As we all know, Greece in the last years have attracted a lot of political attention because of the financial crisis and the cascade effect that it might have in other economies, being in the Eurozone. But on the other side, we have had a lot of secretive negotiations with the international creditors of Greece, which has resulted in many, many deals, including the energy sector. So what we are experiencing here actually in Greece is it is a field that deep austerity and a huge debt economic siege is being tested. But I think what we are also needs to be made as a connection is the lack of democracy and the lack of transparency in the decision making that controls the energy mix of the country. And it's really astonishing because Greece is one of the countries with the highest degree of light intensity, like it receives a lot of sunshine annually. On the other side, we have really not a serious discussion about, how solar energy could be, for example, brought into the electricity grid. On the other side, we have big investment in coal, despite us having the first Green Party Minister of Environment ever in Greece. So I think the discussion here also goes about energy sovereignty. There is a discussion going on in Greece that the country has lost its sovereignty over a number of decisions. And I'm afraid to report that this is also going into the wider sustainability strategy for the country. Now, saying that,
let's cross back to Jesse right now, and let's get some of his ideas on that. You've definitely shared some really unique aspects, I guess, that are kind of also something we haven't really discussed yet. So Jesse, Pavlos was mentioning not only, I guess, the influence that fossil fuel companies have to try and promote their agenda, but also undermine the, I guess, the solar potential, the renewable energy potential on the other hand. Do you find that is already happening in COP21, or is that one of your big fears leading into the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's absolutely already happening. I think in climate policy overall. I think as we're just hearing, the situation in Greece is further complicated by the austerity policies being advanced by different countries and lenders. But overall, when you look at what we're talking about now, what's on the table, we've generally, as environmentalists, accepted that gas is a good bridge fuel, despite the fact that most of our gas in the future is going to have to come via really environmentally compromised processes like hydraulic fracking. And we've generally accepted that a carbon price is the absolute way to go, and that market mechanisms are the future. Those are all narratives and ideas that have been pushed by the industry and supported by those that the industry supports financially. We've gotten away from the solutions like emissions caps that initially the environmental movement was very much behind. So yeah, I mean, I think that the whole conversation around what these solutions will be has been completely taken over by market forces, completely taken over by the fossil fuel industry and others that depend on fossil fuels for their business. And it's eliminated a lot of the really meaningful conversation that should be around renewables. If you just look at the subsidies that are thrown at fossil fuel corporations around the world and compare that to the subsidies that are thrown at renewables, it's a joke. We can't actually seriously say that we're pursuing renewable energy as a world or as individual countries when the vast majority of our energy subsidies are going toward the same old fossil fuels, and very few dollars are going toward renewable energy.
Well, that's very true, and that links us into one of our questions. Actually, we've had a few questioners so far, and if anyone else wants to share questions, it looks like we've got the most, I guess, constructive forum going on the Kick Fossil Fuels Out of COP21 Facebook page, the event page, and then we've had a few questions so far from some of our participants from developing countries in India, in Peru, and in Trinidad and Tobago. And while we have some very kind of diverse questions already, there's a key theme there, and one of the key themes that have already come out is, I guess, how do we create this transition in economies that are largely dependent on fossil fuels? And I know that that's something that Corporate Accountability International cares a lot about, and that's definitely something that Andreas and Pavlos have a few ideas of their own about. But Jesse, what do you think about, obviously it's a more difficult situation in countries that are far more dependent on fossil fuels for their economic growth, when they have, a population, many of which might be in poverty, who are asking for those jobs, are asking for that growth and for food prices to become more affordable. So does Corporate Accountability International have any ideas about what to do about the transition, or is the focus just more about getting these big polluters out of the discussions so that we can all then come up with some solutions that might help these countries in the future?
Yeah, that's something that regularly comes up, and I think, I mean, we are, as an organization, focused on what you just said, Chris, which is getting this interference out of the way to come up with the solutions that make most sense for people and the environment. But I will say that the idea that we need that, for example, Peabody Coal and this whole idea around advanced energy for life or energy poverty, that's sort of the mantra they've advanced, is a little absurd if you think about where we are in the stage of energy and energy technology. The idea that we need to create huge, massive infrastructure, centralized power in places that don't have it already, is like saying that we need to lay landlines for telephones. No, we have cell phones now. That is the technology that we should advance in those areas, just like we should advance community-based renewable energy. It's the energy, the idea that fossil fuels are the only way to provide energy in places that don't have energy or don't have enough is another narrative advanced by the fossil fuel industry and those that support it. There are plenty of technologies that are possible now. What we're lacking is the political will, and we're lacking the political will because the whole narrative and debate has been co-opted by the fossil fuel industry.
Really interesting metaphor there, that we no longer need these kind of models of development or models of growth, just like we no longer need, I guess, landlines. Although if it does help grandma and I guess mum and dad a lot of the times, I can guarantee the landlines will be here a little bit longer, potentially until the new kind of like easy visibility phones are out to help you guys out. But definitely, it's an important metaphor that I think is kind of not really ringing home as clearly as we would like it to, and that's why I guess we are really excited to kind of try and support this call for kicking big polluters out, and actually we hear through the grapevine that there might be some big plans from your side of the fence, Jesse. Do you have any kind of big plans that you're going to be unveiling over the next couple of weeks in the lead up to COP21 that maybe some of the people watching on can use to try and advocate for kicking these big polluters out and making sure that we retake the narrative?
Yeah, thank you so much for that cue up there, Chris. Yeah, we have a report that we're releasing on Monday the 23rd that takes a look at the four of the dozens of sponsors of COP21. They are ENGIE, EDF, Electricité de France, BNP Paribas, and I'm blank. Oh, Suez Environment. Excuse me. And it takes a look at not only their environmental impact as businesses, but also their lobbying practices to undermine climate policy around the world. And the general finding of this report, which I'm sure people can guess, is it's completely absurd, and it's a conflict of interest to have any entity that depends so much on fossil fuels and whose business is so emissions intensive to be paying for a negotiation that's seeking solutions and another path away from those business models. So that comes out 9 a.m. GMT on Monday morning, and we're really excited about it because it's right before COP. It's important that people understand that walking through those doors, that body has potentially already been compromised by those dollars exchanging hands.
Wow. Well, let's definitely keep that in mind when we start to reflect on how the negotiations proceed in the first few days. Obviously, with those large political forces coming into play, potentially start to think about what are some of the background motivations behind some of these decisions that are being made. But I think let's also think about this opportunity that we have, and let's also think about how young writers around the world can get involved in this, because this is a point in which Jesse mentioned happens behind closed doors, or is not exactly out in the open, and these politicians are making decisions in which we're not being told all the information we need to know about how they're making their decisions and why they're making their decisions. So this is really where we think we can make the biggest impact. And I'm going to ask Andreas and Pavlos to share a little bit on this topic. We'll go Andreas first, and there's Pavlos. So right now there's a call for climate that has started, led by the Climate Tracker program, whereby young people around the world can write about the influence of these corporate lobby groups. Now obviously it's a pretty damning influence, and it's a pretty kind of heavy hand that they play on these negotiations. But on the flip side, there is a wonderful kind of upside to this this opportunity. If we can really lay down some transparency and lay down a window for people to view what's happening, it gives them an opportunity to kind of tell their politicians in their countries how they expect them to behave over the next 2 weeks and I guess into the future. And Andreas, I'd love you to share your ideas. You know, what will you be writing about? And do you have any, I guess, hopes for the future that maybe if young people do write about these issues, that we can have a real impact in the negotiations?
Well, I do think that we can have an impact, and it is very important that we do have an impact by highlighting the bad influence those lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry might have. So when I think back, first, in 2010, when really there was this key decision about the German energy policy, which was so unsustainable, one of the key points to move it forward to something much more sustainable the next year was actually to highlight how lobbyists influenced governmental decisions. I think what we should now try to reach in Paris is that we actually just don't let it happen, that we, from the very beginning, from next week on, and in the first week, write together articles on the lobbies in our country. So if I think of Germany, I definitely think of the coal industry, of the car industry, that write about how these guys try to hold negotiations back, that actually there are people being paid for preventing decisions that may save lives. And I think just create a transparency there is something that is really necessary, something that all of us can do and that we should do. And I'm really looking forward to do that because I think it's vital to make Paris a success.
And Pavlos, you obviously kind of come from a country that, like I said before, is putting a lot of its hopes and dreams of economic growth on the fossil fuel investments. Will you be kind of getting involved in this call, and how would you do that if you were, given the kind of the national economic context that you're in?
I think that corporate lobbying is evident all over our everyday lives. In our local communities, it's affecting our local communities, and we are now standing really in a crossroads where all this corporatization of our lives is really is starting to cross a tipping point. It is evident on our national security. It is evident on the changing climate patterns. It is evident on our energy mix, also in our food system. What I would do, what I would like really suggest on other writers, young writers around the world, is like really to try to dig those stories at that take place at the local level, that will help citizens around the world to connect the wider problem, impact that it has in their personal lives. And in doing so, let's bear in mind that the goodness, the solutions, the real climate solutions of the world are the ones that usually don't make it in television news, they don't make it in mainstream media. So it is our responsibility and duty, but also the challenge, to really tap into those local solutions. To give you an example, the entire negotiations are being trapped in the climate smart agriculture narrative. When you start digging into who is hiding behind this global alliance for climate smart agriculture, there are some good guys, but there are also some very big environmental criminals of our lifetimes. When you start uncovering these stories that would have not been uncovered otherwise, then you really start generating really creative and interesting content that you will be surprised that it will be republished and it will be shared wildly. And this is, in my opinion, the most efficient way to speak to a convenient language for the everyday, ordinary person out there.
Definitely, Pavlos, thank you. And I guess to add to that point, probably the solutions that we're looking for may not be the ones that make ExxonMobil and Peabody Coal a lot of money as well, which might be one of the reasons why they're not so interested in some of these solutions right now, at least until they figure out a better business model to take on some of the renewable energy projects they might be hoping to do in the future. But Jesse, one of the things that people often feel sometimes coming from, I guess, countries that don't have such a big role in the negotiations, or at least not publicly, is that if they're not from India, if they're not from China, if they're not from the US, and they write an article, are they really going to have any influence? And one of the things that I've kind of noticed, I guess, over the last couple of years is actually that people from some of the smaller countries, people from kind of countries that I guess, don't have as much public understanding about climate change or public understanding about their role in the negotiations can often have a much bigger impact than they feel. What do you think are some of those countries that you would love to see, I guess, more pressure put on their negotiators? And do you have some idea of countries outside of the US that you're really looking for in terms of leadership on kicking big polluters out and taking some real leadership?
Yeah, and I think to your point about the impact that countries can have, or people from countries that are not sort of the big players in the negotiations, when we took this on in the Global Tobacco Treaty, we were successful because we were working with a coalition of groups and delegates and parties from the Global South. They stood together, they had the moral authority to speak on the issue, and they refused to negotiate until forces like the US and others back down. That's how this is won. And a huge part of that is giving those people, those parties, those negotiators, the political space and support to take that hard stance. The UNFCCC space is incredibly political, and there's a lot of pressure. People are often, as we say in the US, walking on eggshells around certain issues. So there's a huge moment here for journalists from parts of the world that are most impacted right now by the effects of climate change to stand up and tell this story. Tell the story of the U.S. and other global North countries dominating these talks and redirecting the conversation towards industry-friendly solutions. Some of those areas, I think island nations in general, are feeling the impact very, very severely. Many coastline countries in Latin America, and obviously parts of Africa and Asia have that moral authority, and so it's looking for the areas where delegates are more progressive or ready to take that stand. And I think we can talk one-on-one with folks that are interested in digging in a little bit more about that. But this is an issue that's not going to be led by what the UNFCCC sees as the leaders of this treaty. It's not going to be the U.S. It's not going to be anybody in the EU. It's going to be coalitions of global South voices standing up and calling for this. So a key portion of that, an absolutely crucial portion of that, is developing the media, the support in country, and the pressure on those delegates to take that stand. Let them know that we know that this is happening and that they have the power to do something about it.
And I guess a big part of that is also let them know that you want them to say something. Let them know that you are kind of going to be proud of your negotiators standing up and saying something. I kind of remember over the last couple of years when some of the smaller Pacific countries, when the Philippines started really standing up and being a dominant voice, one of the key things, it wasn't just that people were now surprised that some of these lesser powerful countries are standing up and kind of showing their power, but they were just proud to have their own negotiators standing up and speaking out for their interests and speaking up for their rights. And I can kind of guarantee that it's not going to be a U.S. negotiator coming out and saying, we noticed that unfortunately we were accepting a lot of money from ExxonMobil and we've stopped that now, so thanks for everyone telling us to do that. It's going to be these smaller African countries, the smaller Pacific countries, who are really going to have the opportunity to make a big visible impact in these negotiations in trying to kind of push out the undue influence of these big fossil fuel companies who've created this issue and to be perfectly honest aren't kind of the ones who are creating the solutions that these countries need as well. So definitely this is an opportunity for everyone who wants to get involved, but in particular people who might think that their country isn't one of the big contributors to the negotiations, and it's time that they become one. And this might just be the one issue that they could get behind and the one issue that they could really show some leadership on. So thank you. That comes to our end of our webinar today, and I I hope everyone online has been enjoying the discussion we've had. If you want to continue this discussion, you can. You can continue chatting about it in our Facebook event page. You can also continue discussing it in the Climate Tracker 2015 page, where a lot of people from around the world are sharing all the articles that they're producing and are getting involved in our Climate Tracker Call for Climate. Hashtag Call for Climate, and it's kind of going to be a really, really wonderful opportunity for young people around the world to prove to their leaders that not only do they have a voice, not only do they know about the undue influence of these fossil fuel companies that a lot of people think that people simply don't know about, but they're looking forward for their leaders to stand up and take some leadership on it here in COP21. And this is the chance for them to really prove that they can be a proud, prominent country on the global scale, and they can stand up to some of the biggest villains, if you like, that the world has ever had. So I hope you get involved, and there'll be more information made available for everyone who wants it. Thank you so much to Andreas and Pavlos for sharing their insights from Greece and Germany. You can follow Andreas and Pavlos on Twitter. You can also follow them on Facebook. They love all the attention they can get. And you can probably look out for their articles in Greek and German and English over the next couple of days. And Jesse, any final words from you before we cross it over to the real world?
I'm really excited to work with everyone, and please do not hesitate to reach out directly to me. You can get my information. We can probably make it available somehow, right, Chris? I would love to talk with anyone who wants to know more, anything specific about their own countries. But again, journalism plays such a key role in movements like this. Anybody that can get involved in this way is going to make a huge difference. So thanks so much for the opportunity, guys.
And thank you, Jesse, for being with us. We will definitely make that information available for you. Jesse's already been tweeting a little bit, and we'll send around some emails with some more information, especially after Monday morning, 9 a.m. GMT, when that new report gets released by Corporate Accountability International, highlighting these big sponsors of COP21, and we'll be sending out a media briefing for anyone who wants it on just exactly what the big issues there highlighted in the report are, and exactly what they can include and talk about when they want to write about it in their own countries. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining, and you can find us all on Twitter, on Facebook, and you can reach out to us on email. Look out for the hashtags of Facebook groups that I mentioned before, and thanks a lot. Enjoy. As a security update, I know everyone's probably a little bit scared about what's going on in Paris, but I can guarantee you that life continues as normal. The French here have a wonderful spirit of resistance, and they are resisting any calls to be afraid or any calls to prevent them living the lives that we look forward to living over the next couple of weeks, months, and years. And I hope you're all kind of looking forward to a really wonderful couple of weeks at COP21. See you all later.
Thanks.
Bye.